Welcome to the Last American Vagabond. Joining me today in studio is 7Cs of the Ickonic Network. Thank you for joining me today, brother. It's nice to have you in live, real person discussion.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of crazy stuff to talk about. He's been doing some amazing work around a lot of things, but the idea of the kind of total information awareness, Palantir, surveillance, medical surveillance, kind of panopticon overlap that seems to be just exploding right now. And I've got a few other things, we'll just let the conversation take us where it will. And if we get into all of it, I hope so, but we have plenty of madness out there in the world to talk about. So just out of the gate, brother, it's nice to have you in here. How are you? What's going on?
Thanks for having me, man. Absolutely an honor to be here. Been a huge fan of yours for a long time, and day's been great. I cracked some farm fresh eggs today. Got two double yolks, so that was nice.
Nice.
Yeah, nice surprise.
Only Tennessee.
Oh yeah, and just kind of doing some digging, some research, writing my first Substack article. So that's going great. And just talking with a bunch of people, trying to schedule interviews and stuff. So it's been a pretty busy day. I got a shed to build tomorrow. So
nice. So you're new to Tennessee, right?
No, I've been here about 15 years.
Oh,
or
okay.
so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, new to the area, or you're just starting a new project, or just adding to what you got?
Yeah, just building a shed in the back.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. I love it. I'm just, in my mind, I mean, we're trying to do in general is kind of expand into, like I've said a long time ago, put your money where your mouth is, where it's like all the talk about different ways to be sustainable and grow. And so it's like finally our effort here to try to do something with farming and whatever else. And so it's just I'm interested to see what other people are doing and expanding. And so I just think it's such an important time right now to find ways to find less dependence on the state or any kind of authority. It's every day I find more reasons to pull away in some way,
100%. I'm probably letting this out of the bag a little too early, but I'm actually working on a series that's going to go through like different tips for homesteading.
Nice.
Things to avoid, like the certain pitfalls and mistakes that people make. And
that's important.
And stuff like that.
I know a lot of people that went into that with the best of intentions, like everybody, and you just don't, like even people that want the right things for the right reasons and all have the same ideas personalities can butt heads, like I've seen some great projects just kind of fade away because of that, so those are important things to consider. It's all about people, I think, that are people that are willing. I think it all comes back to amicable disagreement. People that can be like, well, we disagree, but let's talk about it, instead of having this like reactionary kind of pushback. I think that the world trains us to be that way today. You know?
I absolutely agree. And even if I'm just doing it all to spite the government, then, that's motivation enough for me.
Yeah, exactly. That's what we should all be doing today. But yeah, it's good to have you on, man, because you've definitely been doing some good work on a lot of these, it's not just technocracy, but how it all connects with everything else and all the different people involved. It really is a just monolith of a conversation. And I'll have your links included for everybody if you want to check all this out. But I say in general, I'd like to start with this point that I even just today, I just played an interview with, for those watching, it'll probably be yesterday, the interview I had with Zoe Smith around her work coming from the kind of medical surveillance, as I don't know if you're familiar with the work, that's right, from the medical coding side of it, right? And to where she was watching this sort of like, as she called it, this SimCity view of like how all this was being used and applied and kind of just collected, and now seeing it dovetail or really turn into this immigration biometric, kind of, which is the same conversation, different narrative, different justification, and talking about how it's building. And as those that have read Whitney's books and plenty of others and watched all of our work, the total information awareness direction from the government just basically became Palantir, sort of like XAI DARPA now became Twitter, And so how this is all building into this massive panopticon of surveillance, So before we get into anything else that jumps to my mind, like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind in regard to not just Palantir, but I think I see that being the central kind of linchpin to it, but the building of that central kind of surveillance structure and where it's going, what jumps to your mind?
Yeah. I would say that it's, total control. We have, I believe the CDC director came from ARPA-H, and she's talked about using AI and basically feeding all of everyone's medical records directly into that and seeing how we can create new vaccines. And it feels like COVID all over again, but now everything is just okay. And there's little resistance because for some reason, everything that Trump is doing, he's Teflon Don, and
and some people, it definitely seems that way, at least as it's being presented to us. I tend to think that more people than we realize are speaking up about it, but how do we know? You just can't see it. Yeah, it's infuriating to see how it continues down this same path for the different reason. And I just so where do you think that the objective is in this in regard to the surveillance aspect, the kind of like you're saying, the kind of consolidation of all of this information? Like, what do you, just your opinion, where do you think their end game is in this? What are they trying to accomplish?
I think that ultimately they're trying to transform the human genome so that when they start adding like technological implants and stuff, like we've known there's a history of vaccines being like immunosuppressants and basically trains the body to stop developing its own antibodies and things like that. And I think that, you know, the chips in the microchips in the head and the, you know, the W-band, the Internet of Bodies, it's very real, very documented stuff is coming up. And I think they're getting our body ready for those things.
Real interesting. Yeah. So just right to the, you know, so the technocratic, or rather more so the transhumanist direction, right?
Yeah.
So it's weird how these things are seen as different topics, are really just like one's further than the other, but they seem to be sort of coming to a head at the same time. You know, it's like the technological advancement is now able to achieve all of this at the same moment. Yeah. So, you know, in regard to the surveillance, and again, I was just actually talking about this in yesterday's show, or day before yesterday for the day we're recording this, the great Palantir reset. It's wild to me how this is exactly what was being rolled out under Biden and long before that. And everybody seemed resistant to it. Yeah. Right. Literally everybody was like, absolutely not. Even plenty of people on the left were uncomfortable and speaking out about it. And so now it's just so alarming. And maybe we can get to this end of the show in general, the whole like weird dynamic of the two-party illusion, that suddenly people are not just not pushing back, not just even being quiet, but like cheering on what they 30 seconds ago were saying was the end of civilization. And, you know, so how do you read that? I mean, how do you make sense of that?
I mean, it seems like it's all just a product of the division, like the division that they sow between us on a small scale, the large scale narratives and everything like that, especially with the two-party illusion, that as long as they're doing something to hurt the other side, even if it's against their own best interests, they're all for it. And it's like people lack the foresight to see how maybe it's not changing something right now, but 5 years from now, the world's going to be totally I mean, when the internet happened, you know, DARPA's ARPANET launched, and now we live in a completely different world than we did 30 years ago. Yeah,
and it's a fair point, because and that point, I don't think we even could fathom what would become of the internet. Like, you would barely understand what today is back then. Same point. And I say this about the genetic, you know, biometrics and all the different things they're collecting on us that we don't even really grasp. Even what we understand, like digital twins and all the things we know about, I still argue we don't even barely understand what that will mean in a real sense 20 years from now. Right. You know, like the idea that they just own all the biometric data about you. They, you know, it could get into all sorts of hypothetical, you know, what that means is terrifying to me when we see, at least right now, what they're doing in regard to, you know, recreating you on a digital sense and what that really means, like kind of, as well as the idea that we see these biometric access points to all of our personal data. Does that mean they could just use, I mean, logically, yes, they could just use your biometrics to enter, you know, it's a very terrifying kind of thing. And now bringing this into the overlap of the deportation dynamic and what we're seeing in the world today, where we're seeing the surveillance on a large scale being now rationalized under immigration. And so I'm sure you saw this as well in 404 Media, where it's saying Palantir's plan to help ICE deport people. So now we're seeing this kind of dovetail with the idea of getting rid of people from the country. But, you know, do you think that's really the objective here in regard to immigration? And how do you see that playing into it all?
I do think that they will end up utilizing the deportation. Trump's even said that, you know, the homegrowns are next on the list. But I could see it very well being a sort of doorway for him to deport dissenters. And, you know, he's setting precedents now with all this MS-13 rhetoric. And I think eventually it's just going to expand to anybody that doesn't agree with the administration. You have people like Steve Bannon, which I'd kind of take with a grain of salt because it's Steve Bannon, but he's talking about Trump, you know, running for a third term.
That is interesting.
Yeah. Trump mentioned that we're not going to have to vote anymore. There's not going to be any more elections. And I think ultimately we're going to end up moving to where the government is largely run by AI, which is what Doge is doing. And it's just going to be this like cold calculating robot that has no morals, and there's no possibility of like a whistleblower or potential leaks of things. And
yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with that. I was just grabbing something that I recently talked about in that regard to the impending future of AI government, you know, and what that really means. And that's not really that, that's happening right now. GSA, the bot they already used, you know, artificial intelligence for efficiency. These are real things they're talking about. So yeah, that definitely is a logical step and what they're telling you is coming, you know? And so the interesting point you made there with like Steve Bannon, before I go in more into that direction, this is kind of an interesting side note. You know, the narrative they're throwing out there. Do you think that is a genuine thing, or do you think that is about trying to get people to like jump at shadows and ignore the technocratic rollout, like things like the third term? You know, like for example, we've seen like the floated idea of like taking Greenland, or these ideas that were, at first people were like, that is he just like trolling everybody? You know, that sounds insane, right? And like threatening military force for the Panama Canal. Like, these are wild ideas that then clearly became real, like, or always were. I don't know. And his own audience were like, you're just being trolled, like you're falling for it, you know? And then 30 seconds after, it was like, now it's a not good idea and you shouldn't have pushed back on it. You know, so the same kind of idea with that is the third term, for example, taking that one head on. They're just so it's clear for everybody out there, there's no legal rationale for that, whether consecutive or not. It is very clear. I think it's the 22nd Amendment. It says very clearly that that's not either way allowed. And so him floating that, and then Trump going, like kind of the way he does, kind of middle of the road, and then Bannon going, no, he's going to in that last interview. So do you think that's, what do you think the likelihood is of that? Do you think it's a ploy?
I think it's kind of likely. I wouldn't take it off of the table. I obviously subscribe to a little bit more of the esoteric stuff as well. And, you know, when it comes to like the Kabbalist belief system, they have to get manufactured consent or some sort of consent. And I think every time they put something out there like that, that's like jokingly, and people don't resist it, people don't get upset about it, and they just let it happen, that to them is manufacturing that consent. And at the end of the day, it absolves him of accountability, because he's like, well, if you didn't want me to run for a third term, why didn't you guys stop me?
And, you know, that's such a problem right now. That's that whole like Andreessen or Anderson. I always called him at first, but Andreessen, I guess how you say it, Mark Andreessen and Alex Karp, and, you know, all of them are basically throwing this idea out of like the oligarchy saving you from the oligarchy, you know, like this Machiavellian idea. Like Trump even said that Napoleon quote, like, you know, ends justify the means, however you actually wrote that out. So they're all really pushing that idea that we just need to give up that control to them, because that's how it's always worked, or rather just let them do what they need to do to get it done. You know, and the third term, at the point that I was making about that, is that they are like, even deportations, kind of just saying like, or even the mandate point, like, well, you voted me in for this point, so how dare you say I can't do it, even though it's illegal? You know, it's manufacturing. Like, I see the destruction of this country's foundational ideals. It's insane to me. And the very people that are arguing that is the most important thing in the world are the ones that seem to be now okay with it. You know, I get the sense that is like the rest of it, like put a toe in the water. Like, we're kind of joking, but if they're not pushing back, so maybe we should actually do it. Like, that seems like how a lot of this goes. But it would be wild to see that. And I think if they did that, it feels like that would be in the designed, like, drive us to civil war kind of an idea. I mean, so let's just say from that extension of that point, if that happened, and it was obviously like the same thing we're seeing right now, where it is illegal, like there's no way around it, it's unconstitutional. And for those that may not know, what you should by now, if it's unconstitutional, you can't pass a law to change that. That's not how the Constitution works. You know, if it's repugnant to the Constitution, it's null and void. Mayberry versus Madison, 1803, I believe. But so that, what do you think would be the end game there? What would be the accomplishment? Like, I think that's, you know, would that be to take power? Would that be for, I mean, what are your thoughts on why they would do that? With seeing how completely undermining it is of this country.
So I'm going to go very harebrained, maybe tinfoil hat a little bit.
Go for it.
So I think that they are slowly going to push the World War III narrative. And I think that if we do end up having he's going to use that as grounds to secure another term, like when we had FDR
emergency
in World War II.
Right.
And if that does end up causing like civil unrest or some sort of civil war, that's the perfect excuse to enact martial law and bring out the robots. And
or whatever else the justified control. Exactly. You know, and that's not even, what's funny is that's not even harebrained. That's like a basic government plot that we've seen 1,000 times over in the world. You know, it's crazy because people don't want to acknowledge that their chosen ideologue would do that. You know, like people that supported Biden would argue he was the one trying to save you from Trump, and vice versa. It's always how it goes. It's insane. I was just reading something from Larkin Rose about that, and really this applies to everything, but it's about the deportations, where it was something like, I guess the gist of it, try to remember the exact wording, was just that every time it goes the same way, where we come to a point to where there are principles. They all at least believe in some way they have them, or they feign to have them. And then they rationalize it, like now, by going, but X, Y, and Z, you know, but there's so many cases we can't do it all in time. It doesn't matter the narrative, right? They're just giving you something to allow you to rationalize what you otherwise wouldn't allow, which is the undermining of your principles and values, and then both sides point at each other.
Yeah.
It never seems to stop, you know?
Hegelian idealism.
Yeah,
and
right.
I actually see like a lot of parallels with the French Revolution to now.
Right.
You have Alex Karp, who wrote the Technological Republic, that I've been meaning to read, so I can kind of get some insight into. I think he's crazy, just personally.
Yeah. I like a sociopath in my mind, at least.
Yeah. And you know, the Trump quoting Napoleon thing. You have the, you know, where they manufactured the Sabbateans basically came in, made the king make all these terrible decisions, and then they use that as the excuse to overthrow him. I think Biden was kind of that French king, and now we have a revolution. And there was even you remember the storming of Bastille, the fortress. We had the Capitol, you know, and it just seems like there's so many parallels. And I remember a couple months ago actually saying, like, I feel like we're going through the French Revolution again, and then 2 days later Trump quoted Napoleon.
It's so interesting.
And I was like,
and, you know, you wonder, is that because they sense that in the conversation, or are they the ones seeding that in the conversation? I think it's both half the time. You know, you don't know. But I do think it's important to think about that the government, especially this administration, uses what they see, you know, what they see kind of bubbling up in the conversation, and they jump on it, and then they use that as like the fulfillment of that prophecy. Like, oh, he did do it. We predicted it. And he's just reading what they said, you know. I'll include this this interview I had with David Icke, in fact, about that exact. And this is, I was new to the idea of Sabbateism and Sabbateanism, or whichever way you say it, and the historical background of that, as he argued, as one of the foundational parts of Judaism, Zionism, and Nazism, and now the infiltration of governments and all of that, which is exactly what we're seeing today.
Yeah.
The French Revolution point's interesting, though. I've heard people make that reference before about the independent media, that we are basically the front lines of that resistance. Yeah. You know, it's plenty of interesting overlaps to that. I think it's very valid. Yeah,
it's crazy because Hegel and his two friends, I think it was Schelling and I can't remember the other guy's name at the moment, but they saw the revolution as the opportunity to push new like philosophies and basically like states of mind and new ideas and concepts and stuff. And then that's when like the Hegelian idealism really took off. And then there's this whole thing with the New School for Social Research that's still around today. They had John Dewey, who was considered like the father of education in the 20th century. And he took a lot of inspiration from Hegel, and there's a lot of other like influential people, Alvin Saunders Johnson from the Rockefeller Foundation, and all these other people that I feel like congregated, and they were like, let's do it again, but make it last 100 years.
Well, what's interesting is that, you know, at some level, I'm a pessimist when it comes to authority in general. So there's usually a design for something that's not in a, altruistic mindset. But you could argue that these people in some ways believe they might be trying to convince you of what they believe will help you, or, or that ultimately it's about, even if they don't care about you, that it's like we manipulate them into seeing the world the way we think will help at least our interest, but maybe everybody else. And that's in no way to say like that's wrong no matter what, in my opinion. But you can see how easy it is to manipulate like the second rung of people that maybe know that they're manipulating, but think they're doing it for altruistic reasons in the government, to get them to think like, the greater good, or even how clearly so many Democrats fall for the climate change scam idea. And many of them, and I don't necessarily mean Congress, but just people influentially believe that they're saving the world, or worse, actually on the other side of it, are convinced that if we don't act now, the world will end in 2 years or whatever it is, like the insane kind of, end, what's it called? Alarmism, and to where that then in their minds rationalizes anything. If we're going to die in 2 years, then we might as well do anything to stop the people that don't care about that. And the right has the same thing now in the same way, whether it's immigration or whatever else, that they're going to destroy the country, or as Elon kept saying before, right, that if we don't do this now with Trump, there'll never be another election. They do that all the time. And most important of your lifetime. It's embarrassing.
There's this belief system called TESCREAL. And Elon's been called that. He tries to not claim it. Mark Andreessen is like a self-professed TESCREAL, all of big tech. And it's essentially, we need to do things like eugenics to preserve humanity and for the betterment of humanity. And then we need big
the bad
tech
thing for good reasons.
Exactly. And like we need the global digital surveillance system, and we need an energy price system and things like this, because they're like, well, so are you against all of humanity, continuing, and trying to argue against that? It's like a catch-22.
Yeah. Well, that's what we were just saying in general about the books they're writing and the discussions they're having, is that they're basically saying, so they have an audience that has clearly been calling out the deep state, the, whatever, the power structure, behind the scenes, they step out of it and say, we are an oligarchy that's trying to basically save you from the bad, or rather the elites trying to save you from the bad elites.
Yeah.
And it's it's a gamble. I'll tell brave play right there for people that are going to be like, to be pushing back on the general idea of that entire thing, or Elon Musk coming out and saying we're fighting the bureaucracy as the most obvious example of a bureaucratic oligarch in the entire conversation. Do you think it's working?
I do. It's hard to say because I'm getting most of my opinions sourced from Elon's platform.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'd love to like go out and poll people and do like a real life poll, because you don't know who's bot or a bot.
Yeah, right.
And so it just feels really, really difficult to get a consensus, especially like when the following thing is set up. Like you're obviously going to have your natural echo chamber. So if I posted something that's critical of it, I'm going to get mostly responses that are also critical of it and agree with me. And then the ones that I don't, they're either trying to like report my post, or, it'll be a one-off, somebody that, Derek was actually talking about this, where he, I think he posted it today, where he said people are too quick to like turn off something that challenges their worldview and their bias and stuff. And I think a lot of the stuff is coming from people just being like, oh, this stupid guy, and like scrolling right past it.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting conversation, right? About that, like where do you get the perception of the majority?
Yeah.
The only place we've ever been able to do that is mainstream media.
Yeah.
And now, the same extension of the mainstream alternative media or these mainstream platforms. And so it's a valid thing to think about. Like, I don't think we ever should dismiss the possibility. Like, honestly, I'm of the mind, at least, where even if I knew that we didn't have the majority, we're never going to succeed, I'd still be fighting. It's just in me,
Yeah.
But you go to the Twitter, you go to the point is they want to project all the time that, you are alone, you're stupid, you're the crazy one, just like with COVID-19, right? Yeah. And yet we found out later that really wasn't the case, right? It was really same with even Israel. It's as Greenblatt got leaked, the leaked video admitted, where it's not partisan. It's an age thing. They see that, they know that, but they need you to think it's your bad neighbor with the Democrat or the Republican, And so how else do we get that today? I think we don't. I think we just have to, you could, like you're saying, go out, talk to people, or even if you want to look on Twitter for the same stuff, like don't just stop at the major things. Look at the comment section, strike out and look for people that don't pop up in your feed, because it's all basically engineered, but you'll find, you look at the comments of some of these really bombastic things. Like I look at the Jones of the world, or these people that have been, at least appearing to rail against these things for decades and now seem to be looking in any other direction. Yeah. You look at their own followers, they're like, what happened to you? Where are you? And some of them still support it, but it's not just him, it's a lot of people. And so I think that it is changing, in my opinion. I think it's very clearly at least going in the direction of the majority. Do you agree with that?
I think so. I think that especially, you have to remember that we're only 4 months into his
crazy term. Right?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And
like 2 years.
And I've seen a lot of people that were like, I love Trump, but then this, and it's like eventually I think that laundry list is going to get long enough. I try to point out to people like, for the second time, Trump has picked a Soros banker as his treasury secretary. I thought you guys hated Soros. Why is he putting him in charge of the U.S. money supply? Right.
Enemies closer or whatever. It's always something to say, know. But I think there's another huge part of it that I don't think I've even brought up. That I think there's a lot of people that are in the Trump supporters, voted for him, whatever else, that are of the mind now that they were tricked. Yeah. But at least they think that, they're worried about it. But you have another 3 years, right? So they're kind of like, the last thing we think they should do is just lurch into it and go, he's wrong and they're lying, because at least let's just let it see. Even if they are convinced he's lying, I think the last thing they want to do is go, they would have been better. That challenges even what their whole worldview is. So the best thing they can do is just hope he does better in the next 4 years. Yeah. So it's like this. I think they've gotten us to a position where they know how this works to such a degree where I wonder if we're even involved in this anymore. Like the whole fake, whether it's on the dead internet point or like these different discussions to where it's like, is any of this actually happening? Like even like the engagement online, we know half the internet is bots at this point. Twitter, I think, is way worse than that.
Yeah.
You know, and so we know that like voting, at least back when I think we could somewhat verify it, was like under 50% at most. And within that, most of them identified as independent.
Yep.
You know, so I think we've gotten to a point to maybe that's just like nobody's doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Like just for fun, what do you think on that idea of, is it possible that like it doesn't, we're everything is a false dynamic? There's real people, but what we get shown and the people who engage in it, the people that are lining up for shots, like, is it all an illusion? You know, to what degree?
I kind of think that it is. I've been doing some researching and stuff into you know, people like Michael Schellenberger and Trevor Fitzgibbon. And it seems like they're, you know, Fitzgibbon was sort of kicked out of the left for like sexual assault stuff. He was never charged with anything, but there were a lot of claims. And so now he's sort of on the right, in the sense that like he was running RFK's like American Values PAC for his election and stuff. And Russell Brand has worked with him. He's thrown tons of events that all these people have spoken at. And now he's like courting them over to the right, while you have Schellenberger on the left sort of running everything, but they're buddies.
Yeah.
And
good.
It's just like PR guys that are able to, you know, they understand like public perception and the way to manipulate that and spin things. And I think it's just a bunch of people that are all friends, and it's all the way down.
Right. I mean, I think we're at a point where the left and right doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yeah.
Like legitimately, like that's not to say conservative and liberal, how you may perceive that, which is just, again, you may perceive it differently than the other person who's conservative. You know, that's where we are today. The words seem to have lost meaning in a lot of ways, but that's the values you may still have. You know, those are yours. That's real, right? That exists how you see it. The point is about the political dynamic of like a side, and how at this point, I mean, look at Trump's administration, how his lead circle are all like barely recently Democrats, right? Like every single one of them, Trump included. Yeah. And so it's like, I made this joke in the beginning, and it's kind of not really a joke. I mean, I don't really think that this is my first go-to on what might be happening, but I joked like the Republicans or conservatives rather. I was like, okay, you're seen as the conspiracy theorist, right? You're the ones out there that think everything, you know, the shit, which I don't think that's what I think that's a false two-party illusion of how there's plenty of reasons to doubt these things. But that if there's anybody out there that's going to consider a theory, that'd be that group, right? And then all of a sudden we see this weird stuff happening. Everyone's talking about coups, and you can't consider whether this is like a Democrat coup of the government. Like that's what you guys are telling us was about to happen. Jones, and it's a coup that's coming. And then I'm like, right there, right? There's all the Democrats who are taking control. I just think that's a funny thought. You know, what do you think about that?
I mean, I think it's a way for them to justify continuing that like false two-party narrative in their head, where they're like, oh, Trump, you remember last time they were like, oh, they duped Trump, but I thought he was supposed to be this like super smart guy.
Right after the left, definitely pointing back to it. He got played for the COVID shot and everything.
And it's like, okay, so now he's picking establishment Democrats that have recently converted, you know, the Soros guy. He's got like the ARPA H lady. He just picked Jay Bhattacharya, I think, for the NIH director, who's friends with Peter Thiel, by the way. I don't know if you knew that. They went to Stanford together. And
they all seem to be going somewhat mainstream with the direction of the whole thing, RK included.
And I don't know, it's one of those things where it's, well, if he did it, then it's not his fault. And you know, that cyclical thinking or whatever, it's like the thinking of a narcissist, but they're being narcissistic like on his behalf.
That is weird. They need to make a definition for that. Well, it is no matter what. I mean, this is what it looks like to worship somebody. This guy, an account Free Prince Online, made a good point about this. I've referenced more than once. I think it was Cat Turd said, I have 100% faith in Cash and Bongino. And he just called it out. Like, that's like the most dangerous thing to say in politics. Like, that's insane. Like that, and even the word faith, that's not saying I believe in somebody. That's a religious word, you know? So that's the point. And like we said with Trump, or even like a Zionist perspective, if you believe that this is God sent, then it doesn't matter what happens, right? If he's murdering 100,000 people, well, by your logic, God wanted that, you know? And it's like, that's crazy to me, you know? And so I think that they're definitely driving you to a place to where you have this like blind faith for your leader, or for rather your what's the right word for it? You know, it's a religious
savior.
Thing. A savior. Yeah, exactly. And that's not, my point is, that's not even like the way we perceive it. There are people literally who believe that. Look at the Israeli cabinet. in the Knesset. They're literally standing up half the time and talking about him like some kind of prophet. And now you've got people posting images of like, Trump. Like there was that really weird video going around. You see that where it was at a rally for Trump, but like a religious one. And they were painting a picture. They were singing and it was like praise and like this whole song about God. And as she's painting and she's praising, and then as it gets done, she's painting Donald Trump and like him praying next to a cross. And they're all like going, and I'm just like, that's blasphemous to me. Like, and I don't bring in my religion to politics. I think that is, or journalism. I think that's ridiculous because one's faith, one's fact-based, but it's just insane to me to see people leaning in so aggressively to the idea that he is a religious figure. Yeah. That's worrisome.
It's kind of crazy because like the Chabad Lubavitch, the black hats and stuff that you always see, I think they're using him to sort of manufacture the end times.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you think that's Chabad Lubavitch, and maybe this is the overlapping of the same conversation, or more of like the political Zionist drive?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of them sort of subscribe to the same belief systems, and that some of them have like more nefarious, goals and tendencies and things like that. And I don't think that it's any mystery as to why Trump is. He just posted on True Social, what was it, yesterday, that said, just got off the phone with BB and we're totally aligned on literally everything,
which is so incredible. While they're committing a genocide, which regardless of what you think about that, these are war crimes. I don't think anybody's disputing that murdering children or bombs are, anyway, sorry, keep going. I just think that blew me away.
Yeah. Well, I think back to like the coin that was minted by Israel that compared Trump to Cyrus the Great, who was known for like, freeing all of the Jews. And I think he's literally helping them to establish the Greater Israel Project. But I also think that all of that is so in the news and in the headlines to distract away from the technocracy stuff. And I see people that are constantly, Zionism, Israel, people that say like it's all the Jews. It's like, well, there's also like a lot of people that aren't Jewish at all that are helping to move this agenda along. And if nobody's putting their foot down and saying no, they're just as culpable.
Right. Well, exactly. And this is the point. And we can prove this. If you can prove that there are Jewish groups, and there's a lot of them. In fact, this is one of those points again for me where I'm really keeping my finger on the pulse on this. And I think it's clear that we're seeing a large group edging towards a majority of people in the world, Orthodox Jewish communities, Jewish Voices for Peace, all these different groups that are pretty large that are calling out Zionism. Yeah. Right. I clearly see that begin to happen. But, it is clearly what I was going to say is that if that exists, if there are Jewish people, 1 or 100,000 who call that out, then you can't say it's the Jews, right? That's just not the reality. But you can also prove that there's I think even today, it's a majority of Christian Zionists that are actually in this conversation, or Herzl being an atheist himself, right, the founder, so it's clear to point out, as even B'Tselem, the leading Israeli human rights group, would say, this is Jewish supremacy. That's not debatable. What is it? Ben Gvir's party is called the Jewish Power Party. It's crazy, it's right on the surface. But that's like the one area it's okay apparently in the world to say these things. The point though is that there's also it comes back to supremacy of the Zionist drive, and there's Christians involved, there's Jewish people involved, there's atheists involved. There's a weird atheist Zionist movement in Israel. Really? And I'm like, how is that not the most? There's one of these really prominent ones that tweets about it all the time. It says right in his bio, atheist Zionist. And I'm like, that's the dumbest. You're over here arguing, and this is God gave us this, but I don't think he's the one making the argument, but from the larger argument that's what this is, everywhere you look, there's fundamental point that they've disproved that's the reality. But so the idea being is that to get back to your point, that they're manufacturing that. Like, so the political Zionism side of this is manufacturing, like, for example, engineering the red heifer. Yeah. Like, not that it was a miracle that it born that way, which is how the mythos is supposed to go. Yeah. But the idea that they made this and then they're going to sacrifice it, which is real. For those that know, they really genetically engineered a red cow and they're going to sacrifice it, which, in 2025, that's what's happening, And so that this is building into that, and they see Trump as a part of that, and so do you think that, like, Ukraine, which a lot of people call like Zion, like the original, do you think these are all part of this greater Israel drive as we discussed a second ago, or do you think a lot of this is all part of a technocratic agenda? Are they one and the same? How do you see that?
I think they're kind of one and the same. I believe that, and this is just my own theory, I don't have a whole lot of proof, but just kind of like trying to project where things are going to be, 15, 20 years from now. Yeah. I think that their whole establishment of like the third temple is going to be the hive mind computer and having everyone linked up to that. And that's going to allow them to sort of control the world.
Yeah, man. So for that, the basic idea is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque is going to be destroyed, and in that place, they'll rebuild the third temple, and that's supposed to sort of signify the end times. Is that, and the point being that, so walk me through that. It's very interesting because I mean, this is one thing that we tell. I mean, even myself, you kind of fall in these traps of thinking in things in the terms they've always been placed in. Like, for example, I always make this point where it's like we're still stuck in like cameras and spy devices and microphones, and it's like we're so far past that.
Yeah.
Like that, there's even Wi-Fi. It's like but we still think that way, looking for things. And so the same idea here, is that. I just lost the thread. Say it again. What were you just saying?
The third temple. And the technocratic.
Oh yeah, the overlap, of the like the AI part of it, right? So we were thinking about this in a worldly sense, but do you think that, like, walk me through your thought on that, how that becomes their mindset through the end times, like the AI kind of surveillance part you were just mentioning? Just flesh that thought out for me.
Yeah, I think so. I think that Israel and Ukraine have a very good possibility of sort of mixing their borders. I think that Israel's going to sort of campaign through Turkey and continue through Syria and Jordan and things like that. And they're going to basically control like that main hub where a lot of the trade comes from. And that's going to make sure that they're a middleman for basically all like global exchanges and exchanges of goods and shipping. And I think that when they finally do set up, I think we're going to be the test. Well, Gaza is going to be the test bed for the like AI government, 15-minute cities and stuff. But we're, building the blocks, right? Well, we're not. Peter Thiel and people like him are. And I think that they see that as sort of their end all be all, where they're going to have the energy based price system. Everything's going to be on a blockchain, according to Larry Fink.
Right.
And that's going to be the way that they can always monitor people. If there's ever dissent, then you're excommunicated, so you'll starve or whatever that looks like. And I think that's the way where they're seeing this as like, this is going to be our fail proof. So we're going to go to war with Iran, destroy the mosque, and eventually establish what is Solomon's temple. And then it's going to be the golden age or the world to come.
Right. And that's such a weird overlap with what Trump's been saying. Right. But so what I meant though is, so from the Zionist perspective, in the technocratic version, how do they see that fulfilling their prophecy?
Yeah.
Right. That's what I'm wondering. Like, so the artificial intelligence side of that, do you think that for some of these like religious Zionists, is that's going to fulfill what they thought would be the classic prophecy? Is that what you think?
Yeah, I do think that.
Interesting.
I think, you break down the Kabbalah and there's things like the Tanya, the Zohar, obviously the Torah, which is a little more mainstream than the other two. But all of those sort of speak about this like golden age and world to come, and it's going to be, bountiful. And I think eventually there's going to be like a huge spike in cancer rates. I believe they're already increasing, but it speaks to like Larry Ellison's cancer vaccine and things like that. And, I think ultimately, and I'm probably going to get a little black pilled here, but I think there is going to be some sort of like mass culling that ends up going on. And
well, we already kind of saw that.
Yeah.
Right.
And
the great poisoning, as Catherine calls it.
Yeah. And I think that there is going to be like an artificial caste system that's sort of, Elon calls it meritocracy, but I see it as like how adhered to you or how adhered are you to like the system? Are you compliant? Do you follow orders? I think Trump was talking about like rating federal employees based on whether or not they'll follow his orders. I don't know if you saw that post the other day.
Doesn't surprise me, no. But yeah, that's something long sought, just ideological control.
Yeah.
Right? You got to follow suit. And so that's what's, as usual, the government bastardization of terms. Like, obviously meritocracy is about, the merit, who's better for the position, not who is most adherent to my mindset, but that's usually how those things work.
Yep.
But so this, now it's this is coming together in my mind. Like, so the AI government becoming sort of like this return of some, like, so this is what really becomes very crazy and alarming for me, is that, so if they're talking about this being, Trump being a prophet, like these are worldly sense things that they're kind of bastardizing into something bigger than that. And the argument that the AI government itself, like because there's this weird movement of like almost, what's the right word for it? Like religiousizing. How would you say that? Like making this religious in context, like the AI being sentient is somehow like a new religion. It's a new, savior, or however you want to frame it, right? And so that the AI government itself would become like the return of their savior, like that would be the end times. That's the idea. That's a terrifying thing to think about.
And how Corey Lewandowski, he was the founder of the Church of the AI.
Oh my God.
The AI
The name.
truth-
Yeah, I know that. That's how long ago was that?
I think he got pardoned in Trump's first term, if I'm not
Of
mistaken.
course. That's insane.
But
Yeah.
I think that's kind of like what that belief system is they're going to eventually see, like, there's already some people that, government is God to them because there's, they're not spiritual or whatever that looks like. So it has to fall to like the next highest commanding authority in existence. And that would be the physical and the real and the worldly. And that's government. And, with Doge and everything. And the EU's also starting to implement AI everywhere. And I think that they're eventually going to posit it to where it's like AI is in charge of everything. It controls, how many resources you're end up allowed, and that meritocracy based on whether or not you're dissident, affecting your social credit score. Like people are going to end up having to worship this thing if they want any sort of livelihood.
God. And of course that it knows better.
Yeah.
And I always reference Eric Schmidt said this, I don't know, like 5 years ago in an interview where he's basically said, we'll get to a point down the line where AI, and I'm paraphrasing, will say this is what we should do, execute whatever, and it will go, that seems immoral, and he goes, but it will know better. Like, he literally made that argument, which is, I mean, even then I was just like, is this a joke? Like April Fools? Like that's the argument, and we are getting to a place, whether it is real or not, where they want you to think, or it is real, however you look at it, they want you to think that it is you're supposed to follow the orders because it knows better, it has more information. Elon Musk even many times argues that this will end the world, but still seems to be rolling out his version of it. It's insane to me. But so bringing this back to the point of the consolidation, because so now that that idea being in people's minds, so we have the idea of, as they build to that direction, because we already talked about the idea of the GSA and how they've deployed a GSA iBot, I think they called it, which is artificial intelligence. And it's everything's being consolidated. That's the point that I can't stop seeing. And that's the total information awareness part, where everything is being consolidated. And they're telling you that now.
Yeah.
Privacy being an afterthought, as even they've essentially alluded to, like, well, we'll deal with that when we get there. Like, what was an actual statement? So consolidating all of these things that were siloed before into one central place for each of these, but eventually in one, I think, is the ultimate point. And so we also have Palantir helping Doge with massive IRS data projects, which you recently commented on. Oh, here's another example of Doge, just the AF Post pointing about this, and Aaron Day showing how it all kind of comes together. You said instead of absolving the IRS, like he said, and Lutnick and claimed they were going to do, he's now allowing Thiel and Alice Karp, by extension CIA, NSA, probably Israel, unfettered access to it. And Palantir AI will be harvesting all of your financial data, and they will be weaponizing your finances against you. So again, thinking about where this is going, which we just were talking about, walk me through that in your mind. Where does this go from there? Explain me, why that's a problem.
Yeah. I mean, it's no secret that Peter Thiel has in the past done some very draconian dystopian things. Look at the NSA mass surveillance that he ended up helping with. I think he just straight up sold them the software. You have like Carbine 911 that was in Israel, the whole like future crime thing. And I think that's eventually, that's where they wanted to go. And it just kind of failed because they didn't have the infrastructure, the technology set up and everything like that. And I think eventually what's going to happen is they're going to, in real time, constantly be monitoring your movements, your communications, different transactions that you have. I think that's why they're wanting to tokenize everything and put everything on the blockchain, so that you can't hide anything that you're doing. And they're going to either use that to, punish you until you end up giving up. I look at, COVID, where it was, well, you can't even go anywhere without a mask. Maybe you don't have to be vaccinated, but you at least have to have a mask. And people would, even the most staunch people would go against that, or not go against it. They'd end up putting the mask on begrudgingly or something like that. But I think eventually it's going to be this thing where it's, we're constantly seeing everything that you're doing. This is concerning to us. Our AI says that you are going to end up committing a crime or like doing something against the government. So we're taking away, some of your credits or your ability to transact, or you won't be able to go see the doctor or whatever that looks like.
Yeah. I mean, arguably in a way that's already happening.
Yeah.
Right. And so the AI would just simply make this more consolidated, more, efficient. Exactly. Which seems to be what they're driving towards. And I think it's also important to highlight that this group, Palantir, that is, I mean, without question, a central part in this entire thing, has a strategic partnership with a group that's committing genocide in multiple countries. They all seem actively, and so what's funny is I bring this up anytime we're referencing this. It's amazing to me that people act like this is not like one of the most valid and relevant points.
Yeah.
It's not like this is like, oh, you just hate Israel. It's like, guys, this is a fun, everyone in the world recognizes what Israel's doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's not my opinion. The amount of information, every human rights group, and to highlight the group, everybody, right? And the idea that this group is literally strategically partnered with a group in January 2024, well into the genocide, who is now consolidating your information, who is now, and going back to the 404 point, using your information to track down people who are here legally in many cases, who are being removed to this country, including Americans, by the way, which is actually happening. I was like, how is that not relevant? You know, it shows you a mindset. Or Alex Karp says on his interview, or his discussion with his own investors, and says, you know, we kill people, like openly talks about these things. That seems
like Project
insane.
Lavender.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
where they're making like those automated kill lists, and they'll use it to bomb a hospital, and they'll be like, well, you know, there were some people that could have been terrorists eventually in there. And you know, and
you see Trump kind of emulating this logic today, right? And just this kind of extension of, you know, well, you know, he's in the wrong place, the wrong time with the wrong clothes. So, you know, if it walks like a duck, you know, it's like, that's what that's not law, guys. That's not how that works. You know? And so I think, you know, back to the IRS point though, where do you see this more specifically being, you know, where, like, from the financial side of this, like not the long-term point, how do you see this affecting day to day? Like, do you have a problem with that in general? Like, not with Palantir and the consolidation. So give me your thoughts on that.
So I have a huge issue with the IRS. I'll go ahead and put it out there. I don't do my taxes. I try to mitigate all the taxes I can legally. And I think that, you know, with things like property tax and the failure to pay that, not being able to keep your house, if that happens, I think Linda McMahon today just posted about, they're getting rid of like student loan debt forgiveness, and people are going to have to pay it. And I think they're going to squeeze people out of, you know, owning anything. And it's eventually going to be this.
That sounds
thing.
familiar.
Yeah. Yeah. even though Klaus Schwab is stepping down and we're getting the Nestle guy.
Yeah, God. But Alex Jones told you we're saving the world. They're retreating like crazy, even though the agenda is going harder than ever. You know? These tokens they put out, it's funny.
Yeah, and I mean the guy that's taken over the WEF in his stead, he's talked about like we need to treat water like a valuable resource, and you know, limit who gets what. And you know, Nestle's bought most of the water in Africa. And
Nestle famously said water is not a human right.
Yeah.
Right. They like that's something they fought back because they were scooping up all these water rights all over the place. So that's actually an old conversation, how long it's been going on.
Yeah.
A lot of people predict water being the next, like the big, like, you know, water wars are coming in a sense, like that kind of thing. What's his name from, I don't know, Michael Berry, I think was his name. He's got a famous like prediction guy. He argues that water is going to be the next thing. He's been investing in it for a long time. He's probably right. I think you're going to be right about that no matter what at some point.
Yeah.
That's probably why.
Well, too, like you have to think like the water cooling for like these AI data centers that are going on. And
that's a good point.
Who I can't remember which family it is, but there's like a family in California that owns like a majority of the water that's coming through like the various dams and reservoirs.
I believe in Texas is similar. In a lot of places, there's one guy that owns like a lot of these water rights.
Yeah.
That was a while ago, so it could have changed by now. But, you know, it's clear that shouldn't be. Like, I'm not going to say like you own land that you don't have the rights to you know, what's under in that land. But at the end of the day, the way this is going forward, or people are kind of in a not malicious, but kind of a, I don't know, in a wrong way, I argue, or scooping up a lot of this stuff that they know is so it can be used in a financial way, as opposed to like, we can't get to a point to where water is something that people need to pay for to survive.
Right.
Like, I just think that's insane. You know, there's a lot between that conversation, but I think that, you know, it's like anything else. It's like, you know, it's a thing, you can't collect rainwater. Like these things come together, you know, there's something is clearly aligned in all this.
Yeah. I'm going to do a funny cut here, but it reminds me of Lord Farquaad from Shrek, where he's like, some of you may die, but that's a risk I'm willing to take.
Yeah.
You know?
Right. That's a government line right there. Right. They're willing to risk us every time for what they want, of course. Well, so there's another aspect of this that is from Doge's side. And this is like, all these pieces are clearly showing a consolidation in every way of information, you know, for their benefit, and is weaponized already against people in this country, Americans included. So raising alarms, the article writes, experts concerned as Doge eyes tracking and surveillance system. You know, so just continuing down this line, we're seeing this very alarming consolidation of power. I just had the conversation with Zoe yesterday, the day before, in regard to the transition to total information awareness. This is an old one from 2017 from Wired, how Peter Thiel's secretive data company pushed into policing.
Mm-hmm.
So clearly this has been a long-term infiltration by Palantir. So two things I want your thoughts on are, Israel's influence through that. And if you see that as relevant, and clearly this has been Donald Trump's administration every time, but I don't think Biden was, he was a part of all of this. He continued all these things, if maybe not saying it as loudly. So how do you see that in general from like the two-party illusion perspective and in Israel's influence on, surveilling Americans in real time?
Yeah. So I think that, Peter Thiel obviously gets a lot of benefits from partnering with Israel, gets a lot of money, contracts, and things like that. And with the whole two-party illusion thing, I think that they very specifically just differ on what most people would probably value as sort of principles, but in the end, it's all, hey, look at this. We're going to do the DEI stuff and the climate change stuff. While in the same time, you had Biden like signing orders to authorize like artificial intelligence being implemented in government. That was passed during his term.
Right.
And I do think that it's sort of this totalitarian tiptoe of, we're going to have you guys fight about these fringe outside things that we really don't care about, because at the end of the day, we're still progressing this technocratic spy, like authoritarian agenda. And I mean, Peter Thiel has, historically was very left leaning and giving to a lot of like left causes and stuff. He supported like Prop 8 and stuff and the gay marriage thing. And to see that it doesn't seem like he's actually principled, and the fact that he like calls himself a libertarian when he's setting up like the most authoritarian regime ever, I think it's just sort of what is sort of convenient for me and will benefit me the most to say in the current moment.
Yep.
And right now that's Israel, that's the technocratic state that's working the military industrial complex, where before he was working with the NSA, but a lot of it was he was just like seeding these like social causes and building his little tech companies, and now they're billions of dollars. And
I mean, he might as well be, he seems to be at the very least a central part of where this is going. Thiel in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, as I think Steve calls it, his golf glove is JD Vance. It's the weirdest, most contrived, the movie, and the whole thing. Like, it's been very clearly cultivated in a pretty short period of time, really. It's very strange how obvious that is. So this overlapping with the Israel part, I think I'm very concerned about, because clearly we can see, even going back to like the Sabbateanism point and seeing how clearly Israel has shown itself to be infiltrating governments. I mean, that's something we'll talk about that next. In fact, just the obvious nature of the infiltration by Israel. And that's not about Jewish people alone. It's about the Zionism and this government, a political organization, like straight up, like literally dictating U.S. policy.
Yeah.
So to the idea that we know that Palantir is immersed with them as well, that they're using they're working with them in Israel to murder people in real time. The idea that they're now spying on Americans. Now realize, for those that didn't pick up on it, if they're looking through, both scanning information online, IRS, social media, but also using biometrics, scanning for people, out in the real world, which is what they're doing for immigrants and so on. Yeah. They're scanning everybody.
Yeah.
It's the only way that makes sense, right?
Yep.
So literally everybody in this country. And so my worry is that Israel through that is, doing that or having access to all that information, which is clearly part of all of this.
Absolutely.
So generally on your thoughts on that, to what degree do you think Israel is able to influence U.S. policy, if not the current administration, or all of it?
I would say that right now we are the United States of Israel. I think that somewhere along the way they realized that the Jeffrey Epstein blackmail empire wasn't working so well, and now it's we're going to use Palantir to spy on you, and we're going to capture you in like compromising positions, or we're going to honeypot you with like a sex worker or something like that. And
that's actually crazy to think about. So if they have that much super like high level view, they're probably catching all sorts of blackmail and information on people that we don't even realize. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. Like, from conversations that are being recorded on phones to, videos that you take of yourself, like all of those end up going to a cloud somewhere. You have the Pegasus that can backdoor basically anything. That's the NSO group.
Yep. And Trump just allowed that. I think it was either executive order or something, like it initiated, like that's now allowed to be used like that. And that's going back through multiple criminal so the NSO group and Pegasus have been legally charged and found guilty with through WhatsApp and plenty of things. And as usual, Trump's allowing. I just want to include that. Go ahead.
Yeah. And, I think it's this thing where they'll approach somebody or they'll like send them, some sort of encrypted email or whatever that looks like. And they'll be like, hey, we have you in this position. I think a lot of it now is when they have somebody that they're wanting to implicate, they'll go visit them and they'll pull them into a room and show them everything that they have on them. And they'll say, hey, if you don't, go along with what we're saying, then we're going to release all this. If you do, then we're going to pay you.
Right.
And
it benefits you. Yeah. Right. So you can gain from it or you can suffer from it.
Yeah.
Right. Most people will go for the former. Yeah. Right. And that's, so I just quickly grab one of them. I recommend people look into this because it's a very alarming thing to think that this is something that is being leaned into. An Israeli spyware platform that has been caught.
Yeah.
I made this point before that if we know, which hopefully we do out there, but it was very public, that Israel was caught putting Stingray spy devices in the White House last administration, that it seemed like it was like reporting on the weather that day.
Yeah.
Like nobody cared about it. I'm like, what is happening? That kind of stuff just shows even further that we're being infiltrated. I think that's obvious. Now, actually, one more thing I wanted to get to before we go to that Israel discussion, because this all interconnects. This is something else that adds to what we were just talking about. It's so funny how there's so many points of this weird consolidation of information that are happening in real time. This is in regard to the overlap of the kind of medical investigatory, like autism investigation consolidation. Lauren said, first of all, this one says, apparently they're launching a new disease registry, which just in and of itself seems like a weird thing to frame it as, to track autistic people. I have the article as well. I'll read from it really quickly, but she says, no, they're running a mass surveillance program under the guise of making a database about autism. Rick adds to this. This is Larry Ellison in February of 2025. And they tag me because they know that I'm like the overlap of Oracle and all this I found really interesting. On another side note, Ezra Cohen, who might become another person in the Trump administration, is completely immersed with Oracle and all this stuff. And it's just, you can't stop seeing these pieces, how they all are interconnected in the very same ways. It says, we need to unify all national data, put it in a database where it's essentially consumable by AI model, which is what they're doing right now.
Yeah.
As long as countries put their data in a single place, we can use AI to help manage care of all the patients. It's all for you.
Yeah.
Or it can be taken advantage of. Privacy is not an issue, or privacy is not, a concern there. They clearly don't care. Here's about the actual platform. It says the NIH is amassing private medical records. Make sure I have it on the screen of federal and commercial databases. So like everything to give the HHS, to give RFK Jr. his new effort to study autism. I'm just reading that terribly. To help that effort.
Yeah.
He says a new data will allow external researchers picked for Kennedy's autism studies to study comprehensive patient data with broad coverage of U.S. population for the first time. That's what Jay Bhattacharya once said.
Yeah, and that's Peter Thiel's friend.
Right.
So
right. And it says the idea of the platform is that the existing data resources are often fragmented and difficult to obtain. And there's a reason for that. That's for personal privacy, HIPAA violations, all sorts of stuff that they just are glossing right over. Medication records from pharmacy chains, lab testing, and genomic data we were just talking about from patients created by the Department of Veteran Affairs and Indian Health Services, claims from private insurers, and data from smartwatches, fitness trackers will all be linked together. Your smartwatch data? That's insane. Like they all promised us things like this, it's all private data. It won't be used. I guarantee they're going to say it'll be anonymized. It never is. They're always using this stuff.
Oh yeah.
The NIH is also now in talks with Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services to broaden agreements governing access to their data, Bhattacharya added. In addition, new disease registry is being launched to track Americans with autism. So those are technically two different things, which will be integrated into that data. Advocacy groups and experts have called out Kennedy for describing autism as a preventable disease, which they say is stigma. That's what they all focus on.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's fascinating to me. So first, before the total information awareness point, the autism thing is interesting because I personally think that he's been pretty damn clear about his opinion about the MMR vaccine.
Yeah.
Even Children's Health Defense came out and was like straight up, that causes autism. And he knows that, even though they're sort of now defending him today, which is frustrating. And he comes out and look, I'm all for more investigation, like investigate this, research it. But the idea that we have to play this game when you guys are in power, who are you playing a game with?
Yeah.
Who are you talking? Who's going to come remove you from power? What are you talking about?
Right.
And so they act like he's pulling punches because he's got to play the game. And he comes out and says that, he said for a third time now, no MMR shots we should be using, and then goes off to make these arguments. So the autism point, what are your thoughts on that? And is this just a backdoor to consolidate more information, or is there more to that? What do you think?
I think that, you know, just from my research and stuff, I'm obviously not a doctor, can't give medical advice. But I think that vaccines have a history of association with, like, you know, people that receive them sort of reacting very, very adversely, in the sense that it does generate these like dissociative dissociative disorders in people. And I think it's, I don't know whether it's like the body going in shock, or if it's the actual, you know, additives or whatever agents may be in the vaccine. You know, I've heard things like graphene oxide and heavy metals and things like that. And I think that especially with like children having a vaccination schedule, that just like with, you know, some institutional religions, the idea is capture them early, and go ahead and before any sort of development happens, and get them sort of immersed in this thing. And they're sort of doing it without the child's consent. And they're, you know, there's not informed consent on the place of the parents, because it's not like you can just get a list of all the ingredients that are in there. If you go to the doctor and they're like, hey, we're going to, you know, vaccinate your child with these 15 different vaccinations. And I think it's, they're saying that they're going to be fighting autism, but also still pushing the vaccines at the same time
that he's claimed cause autism.
Exactly.
I mean, it seems insane to me.
Yeah. And I think that what they're basically doing is they're saying, hey, this thing that everyone kind of cares about and talks about, some people have concerns, especially the parents of these children. They're using that to Trojan horse, very much like Elon did with the Twitter files and free speech and everything like that, where it's, I'm coming to do this for your own good. And essentially it's just installing medical spyware, in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I just don't know why people can't see that. And I think they do, to be honest. Like I said before, see, it's so funny how you fall in that trap where you go, like, you're online in the place that you acknowledge is all run by bots, and you're like, why are they saying that? You know, I do the same thing. It's like, I know why people fall for this stuff. It's so easy to feel like it's organic, but you know, either if those that do, that's the way I should frame that. Cause I know that there are honest people that do. I have some in my life, you know, that fall for these things that aren't part of an agenda. I just don't get why that happens, you know, because it's like, he's come out and said very clearly that this is a problem, right? That this is the reality. The main point for me is we still know that the mumps, measles, and rubella shots have never been tested alongside each other, and they give them in one thing. He's called that out. And now he's saying, go ahead and keep using that while we research more. Like, that's not honest. It's the same as saying Trump knows the shot's hurting people, but says it's good and keep using it for some kind of 4D chess move. So you're okay with them killing children so they can get the right thing done or benefit themselves politically? Like, how can anybody make sense of that logic? You know, it kills me.
Like, you would think anybody with moral and like wherewithal would say, we need to stop all of this immediately.
Even just precautionary. And then we can find out if it's safe, and then we use it again if you want. But until we know, how are we using it?
What happened to the catchphrase, first do no harm? You know?
And this is what's so frustrating to those that have followed his work. He was doing this before, you know, and now suddenly it's different. And here's that point that I was just making, is Children's Health Defense. So I praised them a minute ago, week ago, when they came out and basically the last time he came out and doubled down on it was the second time, where he said these MMR shots are safe and effective. Which is like, what the fuck's crazy. And so they came out and said, no, like, they cause autism. And I said, good. I said, good for them, you know, Children's Health Defense, because he's not technically part of it anymore, but you know how that works in the background, you never know. But then they did follow up afterward and was like, well, we know him and we don't. It's like, you know, you don't, whether you know him or not, you don't really know. So that kind of statement is just giving the benefit of the doubt, which I hate, even if you believe in him. So what I said, well, they said, here, let me play the clip first, actually. Here's what he said in this clip.
My position is people should get the measles vaccine, but if the government should not be mandating.
Understand.
You know, I've always said during my campaign and every public statement I've made, I'm not going to take people's vaccines away from them. What I'm going to do is make sure that we have good science so that people can make an informed choice. And we are doing that science today so that we know the risks of that
which you've done already.
Product, and we also know what the benefits are. And right now, we don't know the risks of many of these products because they're not safety tested.
And I understand.
Yeah, completely fair. Like, I agree with almost everything he's saying there, but that's the idea that you start with take it first until we get there. It's not logical. You know, like, for example, if they were selling cyanide on the shelf
Yeah.
And they said, well, we don't know for sure if it's super deadly. And we're like, guys, it's killing everybody. And they simply said, well, let's keep using it and we'll research it to find out if it kills everybody. And you know that it's a poison. You wouldn't, it's not logical. Like I'm all for the idea of choice, right? That is where we should err on the side of. But the point is he's already argued and they've already researched that these things hurt people. And so that it's hurting people. So it's not, it's again, it's like the idea of putting something out that is inherently dangerous and acting like it's your logical choice. If somebody wants to go seek those chemicals out and put them in their body, that's their choice.
Yeah.
But the government working on it using your tax dollars and then going use it in the meantime, even though we know it kills you, that's not free choice. That's a manipulation, you know?
And the fact that they push it on children, like children can't, you know, have that informed consent and be able to say like, yes, I would love to take a vaccine.
Exactly.
You know, they're babies.
And so I simply said, in other words, that when they said to our dedicated followers, we're reading between the lines. Are you? And I was like, I said, in other words, assuming, giving the benefit of the doubt. I said, how disappointing. And I really mean that. And I said, I'm not in the habit of giving politicians the benefit of the doubt, especially when I believe in them, which is pretty much never. That is never appropriate in politics. I hope you're right, but assuming that is dangerous. And they're getting a lot of pushback in the comments. Yeah. You know, so that is just so frustrating. So to me, it's all about continuing in this direction that gives them, I mean, I hate to be dark about it, but in this case, if it wasn't RFK, what would we be considering? That it would be driving autism in order to investigate autism? Like that's how the government tends to work. Yeah. You know, it seems a very, very weird thing.
Well, it's I always go back to like the QAnon psyop where, you know, it basically convinced people that, hey, you know, don't look at the things I'm doing.
Right.
Try to extrapolate from, you know, my facial expression or the way that I did this one thing or the way that I phrased this specific thing. And I think it's basically like taking advantage of these people that need that hope, need that savior. They're smart. There's a lot of smart people that, you know, follow these things and they keep up with politics and stuff, but they've like invested themselves to be part of this. I'm going to call it a cult.
Yeah.
And
assumptive for sure.
Yeah. And you know, I look at like that's actually something that I'm sort of doing the digging on is like the network that's behind the QAnon conspiracy. And I think that it's really, really close to Michael Flynn and his.
Oh, it seems that way, at least today. He's been on that train for quite a long time, and just sort of like seeing the figures behind it and stuff. And I think that they're able to use that to basically convince people don't believe your lying eyes, which is you know, from 1984. You know what's so interesting about that is that I haven't I talk about the QAnon a lot and how that, you know, that or other types of the same manipulation are played, but I actually haven't thought about it in that way because I talk about that a lot. The idea of there's actually been studies about how today people more invest in what they said last than what they've ever done or what they later do. Yeah. Like it's just about the last thing they tell you. And you're probably nailed it on the head. That's probably exactly what that comes from. And then you have other versions of the same thing on the right. Even like Russiagate, for example, was sort of a similar thing. I always compare the two. Both of them were like, trust the power structure for different reasons, you know? And I think you're right, because now I think we're overrun by that, where people are not looking at what's happening, like you said, whether QAnon or not. I think there's a lot of people I think there's a secondary part of the conservative movement that don't realize they're being led by Q narratives. Yeah. Because they're people within them they listen to are the ones dictating it through that, but don't say that because they're embarrassed by it. Mm-hmm. Like, I really think that. But you're so right. I always point back to, I think it was like Obama or before, Newt Gingrich was on CNN. It's the first time I ever saw this, where he says, she was asking about some stat that was coming directly from the FBI database. And he was like, about crime being down. And she's like, well, the FBI cites that, you know, from their reports, the crime is down. And he goes, well, that's not what my people think. That's not what people think in the city. She goes, but it is down. He goes, well, that's not what they think. And they go back and forth. And he's like, well, I'll believe what the people think over the stuff. And she's like, and even myself, I'm going like, now that doesn't mean just because what the stats show it's right. But you're telling me that you as a politician are going to lean into what they think is happening as opposed to what the stats and the facts show. Exactly. That's exactly what they've been doing forever. And he made that case very publicly because that's what politicians are. Yeah. You know, they're just guided by what they think you want to hear. And so it was so insane. And I mean, it has gone haywire since then. We have the Twitter files, for example, right? Where it's the same thing. Here's just our screenshot. Just trust me, right? It's all back here, but don't have to see it, you know? And I think it's basically, you know, what's funny, that might as well be the woke mind virus for the right. Yeah. It's the same damn thing, right? It's the broflake, snowflake. It's the same damn thing. Yep. Well, two more things on this. I just want to show that this is it's worldwide as well, right? So we have this happening in France. Was a couple of points I saw. Mencho Sin points this out. Under the false pretext of fighting terrorism, classic, France already strips its citizens of the right to privacy. We have this example here. Oh, and this was yours in regard to the IMF in general, or other from the sense saying that we want to consolidate our monetary system and like one, basically the same idea, consolidating all this stuff. So you're seeing all these moves. It's happening all around the world. I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think that they're basically each country is setting up their own technocratic state, and then eventually it's going to get to the point where all they have to do is flip a switch and we're a one world government.
Right. And that's what I worry about is that, what that means. And I don't think we fully know yet is that, in the future, but like when we get to that point to where, whether it's digital ID, social credit, like these movements that are already happening in the world, is it too far? Because then once you say, I disagree, well, then you're booted out.
Yeah.
And so we all see that coming, at least I think most of us do. And I worry once you pass that threshold, that then it'll be at the very least exponentially more difficult to find our way back to what we want. So that's why we need to fight right now.
I agree.
We were saying this before this election and we got called blackpilled.
Yeah. Yeah. And that just goes back to like the world to come, the golden age. Like it sounds good until you understand what it means and you like do the research and things like that. And it's basically the point of no return where there's never going to be the ability for like a revolution or a actual change in power and things like that. And I think that's what they're gearing for. I
definitely agree, man. I hope we're wrong. But the last kind of part to get into today, I think, is the interesting dovetail of both of these. And it's like the Israel influence we were discussing. Daniel McAdams shared this, and he says it's literally insane. America first. I mean, there's so many examples like this, like we showed a second ago. I'll come back to this one here with the, what he said about the White House and Netanyahu. But Glenn says, under new guidelines released by the National Institutes of Health, here's the link for everybody, any medical researchers will have all funds terminated if they support China, the UK, Australia. Nope. Israel, the only one in the world. And he goes, you can support a boycott of any other country or even U.S. states, just not Israel. How the F does people not see how clear that is?
Yeah.
It just absolutely blows my mind.
That's insane. And the fact that it's impacting something that's non-political, like medicine's not supposed to be politicized.
Yes, but where are we going? Right. And so this, my mind went immediately to, okay, wait a minute. Like, it could just be because everyone sees what's happening. And so they're just trying to stave it off. But this, to me, I think there's more to it. The idea that we're going into this technocratic control structure, but it's also the biosecurity, security state. Like we saw, like this, so the evolution of the security state into the bio overlap, that's Stargate. Yeah. Right. And so now they're basically saying if people call this stuff out, or rather in a medical sense are overlapping that with their politics around Israel, then they will get their funding cut. And it could just mean that, but I think it's more like, what do you think? Because it's all hypothetical. How could these things come together? Theorizing. How could the medical side of the conversation, research around, let's not forget Pfizer's lab, that was Israel, research around mRNA injections, research around, medical and technocracy are very kind of one and the same, especially when it gets to transhumanism, right? So what do you think? How do you think these could dovetail hypothetically?
Yeah, I think that, when I look at like the 20th century and everything that Rockefeller did to sort of transform it from the medical field to the medical industry, and create these like national institutes of health with I think it was Mary Lasker, and essentially they're pro eugenics, or I guess dysgenics would be the better term to use.
I've never heard that. Meaning what?
Dysgenics. Yeah. So just the mass culling. They see it as like favorable traits, but according to who?
Well, what I mean is, so dysgenics versus eugenics. Yeah. What's the difference?
I believe eugenics is supposed to be like a altruistic approach and like actually for like the betterment of
I see,
like gene editing and things like that to get rid of disabilities and stuff.
Even if it was misguided that they thought they were doing right. Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And so dysgenics is like nefariously. Yeah. Okay, I got to remember that. That's interesting.
And I think essentially they're saying that this is the Zionist Kabbalistic agenda. This is what we want to see. We want to see this mass culling. So you have to push mRNA shots because that's secretly what Israel's agenda is they want that technocratic government. They want people to be implanted with like biotech and things like that. So suppressing the immune system. And I think it's sort of this thing where it's all one unified front, even though they appear to be like siloed movements, because a lot of the technocracy stuff, a lot of the transhumanism stuff is all from these same, this certain sect that has sort of taken over Judaism and sort of using it as like a shield and sword at the same time. Right. They're the same guys that are in the ear of Putin, Netanyahu, Zelensky, Trump, what was Trudeau. Like they basically run all of them, and there's this huge like false dichotomy going around. And I think they're basically saying like, hey, if you're not all the way with us, then you don't get to be anything. And that's how they're sort of punishing the doctors.
How interesting.
Like the meritocracy thing.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, you
don't follow our ideology.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's wild. So I mean, it seems that there's two obvious, at least potentials. Like you had the, like obviously eugenics, you nailed that. I think that's clear that they all very clearly have this like supremacist eugenicist mindset, or rather dysgenicist.
Yeah.
Right. So clearly that is part of this. And I think that alone might rationalize why they want to hide any work that may be overlapping with that, what they're doing medically. I mean, that seems like these are all just hypothetical. The main point, obviously, back to that is that they're simply going, you can't speak about Israel anywhere in the world. And I was like, that is the point. But this is just where this may be going. The other one was interesting that Derek wrote about, and there was I put out a tweet about this with the actual video. You can find that on our Twitter account. But remember when he talked about the very real science that was it was about ethnic bioweapons. It was a casual thing in a conversation that somebody caught with their phone. It was very weird. I remember he was talking about the science is very clear, where they were researching COVID-19 and they found that it was the H2 gene. It was basically where there was certain ethnicities that were more susceptible or less susceptible. And the ones that were the least susceptible were Ashkenazi Jew and Amish. His point was not meant to be, that was what the study found, right? He pointed it out, which I found interesting. And then on top of that, he basically said in another point that China and South Africa have been working on ethnic bioweapons. So it's not a false thing. They just kind of lurched into it and made it all a big conspiracy theory, even though it was very valid and real. I'll include that article he wrote about it. But so that's one thing I think is possible, right? Where there's potentially more behind, like, I'm of the mind today that the lie around COVID was much more of a fallacy, more like an illusion in almost entirely, if not entirely. But it's still certainly a possible idea that there was some kind of a pathogen used or bacteria that was weaponized. And if it was, and it was weaponized by a certain group against a certain group, that may be very well what they're trying to suppress in that research of medical side of it. Interesting thought.
I've seen some crazy conspiracies. I'm always down to keep an open mind. I just haven't researched into it enough to have like a legitimate position one way or the other, but a lot of people attribute it to the installation of like 5G and EMF and like the launching of satellites and things like that were negatively affecting people, and I think may have intensified the symptoms of like a flu or something like that.
Absolutely. I went over the 5G symptoms dynamic right in the beginning. Actually, that was the first video I ever did that got over 1 million views, and that's what got me censored on YouTube for the first time. But it wasn't even claiming that they were the same thing, just going, look at how interesting this is. Look at the study. And there's actually a peer-reviewed study that compared the symptoms or the side effects of whatever we were calling COVID and then what 5G was, and it was like the same list.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that's wild, and it got pushed away really quickly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's something to that, definitely. Like you're saying, just the idea of, I guess the argument would be like electromagnetically or electrically causing some kind of what would you call it?
Yeah.
Like a disease?
Yeah. Well, they even have done studies that like EMF does affect like cellular activity and things like that.
Definitely.
And I think that, as they were installing and launching like the nationwide 5G network, all these different carriers and stuff, that there probably were people that were experiencing this sort of EMF radiation for the first time, and that ended up getting them sick, and
at the very least could have overlapped. You know what I mean? Like, it's funny how people has to be one thing or the other. Like one of the earliest thoughts that I thought made a lot of sense, I think it might have been Mikovits and some others, but was that it's a lot of different things, like kind of simultaneously, which really did make sense, not necessarily organically, and it could have, glyphosate and dioxins and everything else in the world is certainly possible, but I think it was something that was clearly done. Denny Rancoux, I had an interview with the second time. I think it's the third time, actually. He made the argument well down the line. I think this was December 2024, where he says the COVID-19, the illusion was, his research was always arguing that you could prove mathematically that should they have wanted to, they easily could have lied about everything using false PCR tests, conflation of flu pneumonia with COVID and everything else. But then he further argued that he thinks that the largest part of this was called biological stress-induced bacterial pneumonia, which is a very real thing. Very stress can induce these things. But the argument being, and this I think perfectly dovetails what you're saying, is that this was leaned into, if not manufactured or at the very least caused, but the overlap of the 5G and the stress on the body absolutely would lean into that. And then of course the masks, which caused the same kind of
lockdowns.
And or even just the mask itself causing bacterial pneumonia. So you can see all this kind of comes together. The question is, if that is the case, was that literally like seen driven into reality? Weird discussions. But see, all these things it comes down to the idea that I think governments are clearly have shown themselves, have in the past, to be willing to do whatever it takes to their own population to achieve their ends. That's just, I think, history.
Yeah, I agree. And I would even go to say like the false two-party like dichotomy that we have here is I see the same thing with East versus West, where, you know, like take China's DeepSeek, for example. You know, they launched DeepSeek and now all of America is like, oh, well, that now they have a better AI. We need to keep up with them. So now we have to make a better AI.
Right.
And it's sort of like, we'll take one step and then you take the other, and we'll take one step, you take the other.
You think that's by like them working together in a way?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's certainly part of it. I think there's been more coordination with groups like China. I mean, even James Corbett's covered long-term, like the facilitation of weapons transfers to Israel, right? Like, I think there's a lot of that. But at the same time, you know, it's interesting is that like it ultimately they're using them to justify it, but it's like in the way you see like malicious actions too, right? Where if we've seen actions, again, at least as it's perceived, maybe this is all theater, but that they take action that it's like almost militaristic to stop them from achieving that, which is such a frustrating thing if that is real. That if that is real, is that ultimately that they are taking action against somebody who's not necessarily doing something devious, but is just seeking what that you want, but first.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's because, you know, the idea that American preeminence is more important than anything else because we're the good guys in the world is just such an archaic and simply wrong mindset. And they use that to attack people for no reason. I thought it's worth pointing out.
Yeah,
Weird.
It's and I think they understand that I think people in each of their respective countries always see, you know, someone else in another country as the other.
Totally.
So
the dehumanization.
So they can always use this like Emmanuel Goldstein type character to just justify doing whatever they want.
Right. And it's used everywhere. That's the thing. That's just government tactics as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, they're all like meeting at, you know, WEF events and things like that. They're all buddy, and you know, I think it's just one big show. Yeah,
or like all those memes, which there's new ones with like the new crew, right? Where they're all laughing, like, can't believe they took the shot. Obama and Trump and Biden, you know, and it's just so funny. And some of these pictures, you could find pictures of them in same places. Like that old one was, I think there are, you know, those real photos of like, you know, at the time was in Clinton and Bush and, you know, and they, or even, you know, I mean, this was one of the earliest examples of Trump's inauguration. Remember, we're like all of them, all the people that Jones was telling you the deep state are all there and they're all high-fiving and talking and, you know, it's like, now they're the unity team because they're on our side. You know, why isn't Bill Gates or Fauci in jail yet? You know, the same obvious point.
Fauci got a medal on his way out. You know, I started researching like the technocracy historically, and you know, I see things of. Do you know Guy Tugwell? He was a very staunch like technocrat. He was a huge fan of like Hegel and Dewey, and he was in FDR's cabinet, and then he was very prominent in getting the Social Security numbers created.
I was just talking about that.
Serialized people, and I see it as like this 100-year plan, and everything else is just kind of like, well, we're gonna entertain you with this, and here's this false narrative, and here's that, when ultimately I think this has been the goal. Right.
It's interesting. I actually have I'll reference this and then we can talk just to end with some of those points about Israel. But I think this is what Catherine put this out. I think we're going to talk about this on 26th, I think, for an IMA panel, but she put this out. It's called The Fast Approaching Digital Control Grid, a checklist of Trump administration actions to date. It's really well done. And it goes through all the different things that at least she sees as these steps in the direction of technocracy and the kind of digital control structure. And what she wrote about the Social Security, which I think is, like you're just saying, I think this is really important to consider. Where was it? Here we go. So she says, Doge's focus on Social Security and the IRS is important. In a recent review of American legal history from the 1871 Act to provide a government for the District of Columbia forward, Josh Stileman had some interesting comments on these two agencies. It says, what can be verified in the historical record is that during Wilson's administration, several mechanisms were indeed established that fundamentally altered the relationship between citizens and government, including the Federal Reserve System, income taxation, and later the Social Security System with its universal numerical identification, like you're saying. These systems were presented as public benefits, as always, like Neuralink and everything else, right? Effectively created trackable financial identities. Now, you could argue that some of them thought it was good. Maybe they all thought it was going to be something for your benefit. Either way, it's now being used as, especially today with as we were highlighting, the total information awareness, scooping up everything to, you know, our trackable system, right? Some kind of an identifiable technocratic control structure. And it goes that constitutional scholars like Edwin Vieira Jr. have analyzed as potential instruments of financial monitoring and control, and we get into like the CBDC aspect, the digital IDs, right? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would absolutely agree. I think that, you know, I've looked at some things, and FDR was he was a Freemason. Teddy Roosevelt was a Freemason. And when it comes to the establishment of like the Federal Reserve, Wilson was going against Taft, and then Roosevelt jumps in, splits the ticket, and then Wilson ends up getting in and then creates the Federal Reserve. I don't think that was, you know, just
it really is.
Yeah. and you know, especially the conservancy movement, right? Teddy Roosevelt is a big like conservative, you know, conservation person. That stemmed from the efficiency movement that inspired the engineers that did the engineers in the price system that technocracy got set up on.
Right. I mean, you know, it's always, you could argue that these things are just kind of like, you know, the steps that were taken, the logical conclusion of what happened next. But I mean, if you look through government, especially just the U.S. government's history alone, it's so transparent that there's been coordinated efforts, you know, and the pushback is always that, oh, they have plans for everything. I think that's a naive argument. Yes, I do agree that they map things out and everything, but it's not just that they just like, it's illogical to think they've got a plan for everything. That seems literally impossible. You know? But it's clear that they coordinate and they do shift based on our response. But there are coordinated actions, and it's almost always of the idea that they need more control of our lives, even if some of them think that's in our best interest.
Exactly.
It's literally everywhere, you know? And I mean, go ahead. You have a thought?
Oh, I was, you know, it's not one of those things where I think like 100 years ago they saw, you know, we'd be exactly where we are, and they knew exactly where things were going to go. But it's
they
like,
guessed.
You know, they have this mass surveillance stuff, and they have like tons of psychiatrists, psychologists, social engineering, you know, IARPA, the intelligence agencies, all these things that they work in unison with each other. Like they all work for the government,
right?
And they can use all of these things. Like when you have all the information, the resources, and money in the world, you know, it could probably be pretty easy to steer public perception and socially engineer people one way or the other. And
on that note, in general, I mean, I was recently, what was that? A study, something I was just reading about that, where, you know, the argument is that I don't think I think it's literally never been more clear that that's like we were just saying, like possibly everything. Yeah. You know, like that there's like, I think Twitter today, it's always been building and probably part of the same thing, but very clearly Twitter today, obviously the XAI, DARPA's program, it's all what this is like mapping out his training and coordinate. It's not just that we get different pop-ups, you know, and it's like different versions of it for different groups. And it's like a large social engineering experiment. Yeah. And I think it's very obviously like not just mapping out what we're doing, but then literally driving conversations, guiding the outcome in a worldwide sense too. Yeah. You know, like we saw these weird kind of stories that kind of, you know, out of nowhere pop up that overtakes the whole conversation, drones or fog or whatever else, when clearly there's something there, but the social contagion of it goes out of control. And I don't think that's organic, not entirely. Yeah. Like there's, you know, testing the waters, but yeah, I think we should consider how much of our conversations are, you know, not just like I'd call it the dangly cat toy where they go, look at this thing and we all bat at it. You know, it's more that they're like, I wonder whether what I cover every day in some way is what they want me to be looking at. Yeah. You know, that kind of thought. We need to at least consider that.
I covered a little bit of this on one of my episodes of Ickonic. Last year on April Fool's Day, they came out with a story that was about mRNA lettuce and them starting to put like mRNA and vaccine material in food. Fake. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it went away. And I think what they were doing was they were putting that out there, gauging social perception, collecting talking points from different people, and then trying to, you know, they're taking it back to the drawing board and they're like, okay, so now how are we going to be able to do this? And it's like, well, we're just going to use the people should have to, you know, we should mandate it or we shouldn't. And it's not ever like they're corralling the conversation into those two decisions versus not at all.
Whether it should happen at all. Yeah, exactly. Well, also I would add to it that that dynamic is obviously part of it, where there are things that haven't happened yet, where that's but I think that one's happened already. Yeah. I think that happened a lot. I talked about back when cannabis was being legalized, like in the 90s, like where the argument being that they were already pushing it into a control structure. Like that's where it is today, where the government can profit from it. So they just look at the other way, even though they still it's a Schedule I drug, which is mind blowing to me still, which is insane, which means it has no medical value and it's highly addictive and no medical value, which is just insanely wrong. But, you know, the idea that GMO cannabis was a thing early. Yeah. They were really, in Canada was a big push. I think it was Prairie City Inc. was the company. I don't know if they exist in the same form, but at the time then they were already working on putting antidepressants in food, in plants and foods or other pharmaceuticals. And so that was an early overlap. And I'm like, okay, I'm staying away from the cannabis mainstream market, you know? But so I think we're well past the point to where that's possible, if not already been done. In Tennessee, they rolled out legislation, or they tried to, about identifying or labeling vegetables or foods that have mRNA in them.
Yeah.
And in the congressional conversation, they were like, is that happening? And the guy's like, well, that's not the point. If we want to set this ahead of time, so if it happens, it can be labeled, and they just couldn't wrap their mind around it, or they were being funded by something, you know, and I think got a lot of pushback on it.
Yeah, it was they were like I think the law had to go around like, do we label this as a drug or not? And it was yes or no. And not like, hey, can we just not?
As always. Right. I mean, how would you pass a bill that says if there's anything other than food that we should have a label for it? Yeah. That sounds like it makes sense to me.
Yeah. Or let it just grow out of the ground. Stop adding stuff to it. Leave it alone. It's been fine for thousands of years.
Right.
You know?
Right. Or disband the government entirely. Yeah. Well, I think this overlaps with, you know, my opinion. I think that right now the influence of what I see as not just Israel, but a larger, like the representation of technocracy and globalism. And I think Zionism in Israel is just a central part of that.
Yeah.
We see things like this where Ryan Grimm and I always mispronounce his name, Sagar and Jetty, I think. They wrote an article together for Drop Site News. And this, I mean, you've probably seen it. The National Security Council Director for Israel and Iran previously worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. They've now just put that person in position, and apparently is an Israeli citizen. I mean, it's insane to be in the National Security Council and have previously worked for the Israeli government, but especially the Ministry of Defense. Yeah. You know, it's stuff like that that blows my mind. Or, as I believe they're already reportedly considering, Ezra Cullen, who worked with Oracle, who is the Israel connections are, as JetX writes, might as well appoint someone from the Knesset. You know, it is so insane how clear this continues to happen, or the one we just saw. Same side of every issue. Yeah. Right. So my point was, but America first, right? So if you're on the same side of every issue with Netanyahu, that means then you're on the side of there's issues that clearly Netanyahu takes that are not in America's interest. Yeah. I mean, it's just very transparent to me. Well, the overlap. And one last point, and we can just end this talking about where you see this. Jeremy Scahill says, after meeting with senior Republicans at Mar-a-Lago, Ben-Gvir, maybe you didn't see this, he's now in the United States as the ICC. Everyone who's a part of that is supposed to arrest this man on site. Yeah. They don't care. And it says they expressed support. This is him saying this. They expressed support for my very clear position on how to act in Gaza, and that the food and aid depots should be bombed. That's what he tweeted.
Legitimate war crime?
Yeah, obviously, yeah. You know, and the idea that we're talking about, even like the idea that they are actively starving people is undeniable. Yeah. Right. And they even now just admitted it. And even the other wild biblical Zionist in his cabinet, I always blank on his name. He just came out and said this as he's the ambassador to Israel for Trump's cabinet.
Mike Huckabee?
Huckabee, thank you. Yeah. He came out and said, and basically the WHO asked him to put pressure on Israel to not starve these people. They basically said to give food to people. It's been 50 days since they brought in food. And so he stands up, makes a video that says, they just reached out to me to put pressure on Hamas. And I think we should all do that or rather put pressure on Israel. And I think we should all do that by pressuring Hamas to stop blocking the food. That's what he did. And then went on to make the argument that we won't bring food in until they stop what they've been proven to have never been doing. So they're all coming out and saying we're starving people. And his argument is not just that, but bomb the aid depots. Yeah. Where does he think that the hostages or POWs are getting food from? Yeah. You know, I mean, and so he then goes on to say, in a subsequent statement, Ben-Gvir said this, I see the reports about the debate over who should bring humanitarian aid into Gaza. Well, he goes, it's a fundamentally stupid debate because the entire strip should not receive any ounce of aid as long as our hostages are being held there, which would mean they would starve. Yeah. Right. This is where our government is, and they're supporting these people. That was at Mar-a-Lago, for crying out loud. You know, I just think it's insane where we are.
And the constant, you know, unless Hamas does this, unless Hamas does that. And it's like, but Israel and Netanyahu specifically funded Hamas.
Exactly.
Very much like with ISIS, you know, where it's they're basically creating this enemy that they can then war with in perpetuity and use it to justify their actions for everything. Yeah.
Well, and I do think there's nuance to it as well, though, is I think that, you know, and the point should be made is regardless of whether, which they did fund Hamas, it does not change the legal resistance argument, right? Yeah. It could literally be all Mossad agents. And if you're in Palestine fighting for Palestinian resistance, the point is for Geneva Convention, you have the right to legal armed resistance, whether or not they were bombing you because they're illegally occupied. That's important regardless of what the funding was. I think people always act like saying that is you undermining their right to resist. That's not the case in my mind. But the point is, you're right, is that there's clear influence on this that goes back a long time. And I think that the dynamic has been used very clearly. But so hold on, I just lost it again. What was your point about Hamas? Sorry, I just lost my thread on that.
Oh, just that I think that they ended up creating Hamas and using them as the justification to finally take Palestine. I mean, they've been trying to do that for years and years.
The point, I forgot, but I agree. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, the Hannibal Directive and things to make things seem way more extreme than they were, and trying to blame it on Hamas. And I don't know. I just sort of see it as this like straw man that they're using. And there's always going to be Hamas anywhere in the world. They've said there's Hamas in America.
Right.
And it's like, well, then so basically you can just blanket. It's like the new terrorist.
Right.
Basically, you can just blanket anybody that goes against whatever you say, and you can then use that label to justify doing whatever you want to them, including, I mean, I've seen, I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was Randy Fine.
Yeah,
but
that guy's a maniac.
Yeah, but I don't want to misattribute this quote to him, but I think it was something like, yes, every newborn baby in Gaza is Hamas and is a terrorist.
I mean, he's not, he doesn't pull punches at all. He says, bomb them all. He said he constantly does that. Trump has endorsed him more than once.
Yeah.
What I was going to say though was about the idea of the Hamas and the like, basically Israel has played this line where return the hostages and end the war, right?
Yeah.
And then right now, and for the fifth time, in fact, throughout this process, but they just said it again. They said, well, basically Hamas, again, also for like the fifth time, said, we'll return all the hostages right now if you end the war.
Yeah.
And so basically then it puts them in the spot to have to admit that that's not what they really want. Because they go, well, we can't give them all the hostages because Hamas is demanding we end the war. And it's like, they literally just said, give us this to end the war. And they go, okay. And you go, but we can't because that'll end the war.
Yeah.
It's this. And the point is, nobody with a brain, everyone sees that.
Yeah.
You know, I think in generally, the only people that are completely immersed in this because they have a side, don't care about what's happening. You know, to me, all that really shows is they're using this as the excuse to continue, as you're saying, to go after all that they want. My point is it all comes back to the fact that our government is blindly okay with all this. And that why I brought that up is that speaks to the infiltration.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't believe, even if they wanted all this, even if they're like gleeful murderers that want to see children killed, how they would do this against what most people in this country want, unless that there's something else driving that.
Yeah.
And I think that ties back to technocracy and globalism and all of it, you know?
Yeah.
So it's a terrifying thing to see how this all kind of continues to build. And the people that should be pushing back the most are the ones that seem to be blinded to it the most right now. And that's crazy.
Yeah. And I mean, you have the technocratic, like we're spying on you and collecting all this blackmail and stuff. And then you have things like APAC. And I'm under the firm belief I don't know if you've heard of the PAC Club for Growth.
I think so.
But they fund people like Rand Paul and Thomas Massey, Pat Toomey, Ted Cruz. And that is Jeff Yoss, largely. Jeff Yoss, Peter Thiel.
Right.
I think the Mercer family is involved with that. But that sort of affects, they influence politicians to make like decisions here domestically. And there's like 70 plus pro-Israel lobbies in the United States that are not just AIPAC.
Right.
They just don't have Israel specifically in their name.
Right.
And a lot of people don't see those things. And I think that, you know, even just focusing on the AIPAC money itself and the influence there with all the politicians, imagine what hasn't had a light shown on it.
Exactly.
Yet.
Exactly.
Like Club for Growth, for example, the biggest donor is Jeff Yoss, and Jeff Yoss, you know, he donates directly to the Kohelet Policy Forum, which is a think tank in Israel. It's like Moshe Koppel. He's like a Talmudic scholar and follows all those like Kabbalistic things. And he's like, I forget who, Eugene Kontrovich is a member of the Kohelet Policy Forum as well. He came up with a term called galbalization.
Oh, I was just looking at that.
Yeah, which is sending like your excess prison population to another country with a prison population, like what Trump's wanted to do to El Salvador and stuff. And I think that there's a lot more going on that are keeping all of these politicians basically adhered to Israel's agenda, whether that is the blackmail coming in through the technocratic means, or even if they're not funded by AIPAC, like go look at their funding. Go look at Susquehanna International Group, which is like a majority owner of ByteDance. And like I knew TikTok was going to stay because ByteDance was already owned by like BlackRock, Susquehanna, Sequoia Capital, and things like that. And they set it up as like this false pretense so Trump could come right back in first couple of days, save it. But yeah, there's a lot going on, and I think that we, as sort of a collective nation, don't even understand the level of like the chasm that there is between what we know and what's being shown to us, and even what you can investigate and research versus what's going on behind closed doors and all these conversations that they're having and stuff.
And I would say a chasm between what we think we are as this country and what we are right now.
Yeah.
Like, and you know, I not the idea that I always, just because we're objectively, maybe we were never what we thought we were, right? But I think I believe that to some level that the ideals that we think are foundational at some, you know, we're, you know, the point is that even back to the founding fathers, there are people in that very room that were pushing for the same government we have, the kind of federalized, controlling government we have now. I argue that if not actually went out, very rapidly became the case early on in this country. The point is that today, I mean, I think we lost this place a long time ago to stuff we're talking about here. That's not to say we can't get back to what we might want, but hopefully we can design a future without government. That'd be my mindset, but it's just so clear. And so much obvious pushback from people with nothing but emotional, you know, you're a racist kind of arguments that it's just to when you're presenting facts. It just shows you that we are in a bad way. And I think most Americans are becoming aware of that. Like with COVID, though, it takes you standing up and doing something about it, you know, and we absolutely need that more than ever right now, because this is such an obvious problem. Now, I think it's a good place to end. I think the focal point there was good to end on. But we should definitely do this again since you're pretty close. Yeah. And I'd like to, you know, talk about stuff like the deportation conversation, because you could go 100 different ways with how this ties in with exactly what we were talking about, whether technocracy or infiltration by foreign governments, but it is everywhere. And there's clearly a constitutional issue, and that's not just a left-right issue, guys. Everything coming down right now is being done, in my opinion, to either distract from what they're building or to, you know, I think just destabilize this so it's easier to manipulate. Yeah, that's my personal opinion. But any last thoughts to leave us on before we reconnect in the future?
I would say, first of all, thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Always do your own research. You know, formulate your own conclusions. In the same way that people say don't shoot the messenger, I think that it's also important to not worship the messenger, like we're seeing with a lot of these figures today.
That's a good point.
And focus on the information. Even if the information makes you uncomfortable, I think that it, you know, as far as if you in general want to have a good life, you have to sometimes delve into these things that do make you uncomfortable and have these conversations that maybe they've made it to where, you know, it's difficult to have these conversations based on fear of consequence or social taboo or whatever that looks like. Don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to stand up for what you think is right. And realize that, you know, the government's entire foundational purpose is to exert its political will on people. And it doesn't matter if that's good or bad. It eliminates the choice for people. And there are very dire consequences for the people that refuse. And I think that, you know, there's more of us than there are of them.
Right.
And the second that people are able to wake up and realize that they have more power than they're sort of socially conditioned to believe, I think that eventually we could end up getting to a point where we could have something great.
Yeah, well said, man. I agree. Well, thanks for joining me, brother, and we'll do it again soon.
Absolutely.
And as always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
The hold of the Israel lobby on American politics is so frightening, so terrifying, that anything is possible to drag the United States into yet another war. Our politicians have sold themselves to the Israel lobby. They're on the take. They take big bucks. They get big bucks. By the way, not only from Jewish Zionists, but from Christian Zionists. So just to understand, this is a lobby that wants to turn American policy over to Israel. And it has effectively done that for 30 years. The U.S. has gotten dragged into one war after another because Israel has said so.
The Israel lobby in Washington is apparently working in overdrive. The White House announced just about an hour ago the appointment of someone I've never heard of. Her name is Merav Seren, first name M-E-R-A-V, surname C-E-R-E-N, to head the Iran-Israel desk on the National Security Council. Now, you might say, well, who is she? She's a joint United States and Israeli citizen and a former official of the IDF. Now, why would Donald Trump authorize Michael Waltz to hire a former official of the IDF to purport
of the Israeli Ministry of Defense? Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Right. to purport to advise the President of the United States on Iran and Israel relations. What kind of advice does he think he's going to get from her?
You see, it's not even remotely subtle how the Israel lobby works. Why not just put Israelis into the National Security Council? we can cut out all of the middlemen, as it were. Now, who is she? She is Israeli-born, apparently dual citizenship, as you say. Apparently, I don't know that fact. She worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense, no less. And then she showed up on Ted Cruz's staff. And this is how it works. Ted Cruz receives a fortune from the Israel lobby. A fortune. According to OpenSecrets.org, which records these things, in the most recent campaign cycle, if I recall the data correctly, more than $1 million from pro-Israel lobby groups. So basically, this is a scam operation. Our politicians have sold themselves out to the Israel lobby. They hire people who have, well, I don't know what she has, except that she apparently is an Israeli citizen who has worked for the Israeli Ministry of Defense. Shocking enough, completely unacceptable for also for a president who says that his aim is America first.
Does she get a national security clearance? Can she see state secrets in her job at the National Security Council? She who must still enjoy some loyalty to the Israeli Defense Ministry?
No doubt. In Washington, everything's for sale, including American foreign policy. And Israel has controlled it, and it has dragged us into one war after another. And today's news with this is unbelievable. How are we going to extricate ourselves from this? Where is America first? Where is foreign policy for the United States interest? Now you have someone from the U.S., from the Israel Defense Ministry inside the White House in charge of policy. And my God, are we going to get peace that way? Or are we going to get perpetual war? Whose foreign policy interest are we going to get? Because the United States could satisfy American security and could align with the whole world by changing one vote.
Is this woman that's now on the National Security Council more likely than not a Mossad asset?
Well,
I mean, we really have a foreign agent in the White House who happens to have American citizenship.
Yes, it is profoundly irresponsible of a president of the United States to mortgage American foreign policy this way. But of course, it's extraordinarily reckless of our country to allow a lobby to buy the American military, to buy American foreign policy. And since what they are buying is extremist and radical and perpetual war,